Hello students, welcome to PRL 580. We are in week 2 and this week we are looking at global public relations and culture. You'll see in the week 2 agenda that we are focusing on reading chapters 3 and 4 of the Curtin and Gaither text as well as chapters 3 and 5 of the Golan text. Some of the ideas will be focusing on the circuit of culture and regulatory environments within global public relations practice. You'll also be completing discussion board number 2, which is due on Friday, with the replies post due on Sunday, as well as a reflective response essay that's due on Sunday as well. Discussion board number 2 asks you to explain the circuit of culture and provide an example of that circuit and how it's used in public relations within 500 words. It's important for you to read all of your course mates' posts and respond to at least 3 of them no later than Sunday. Your actual answer is due on Friday, so do be mindful of that as you are working on your assignments this week. We will have in-depth explanation and instruction on what the circuit of culture is and where it is in the text later on in this lecture. Your second assignment is an assignment of a reflective response assignment asking you to write an essay based on some of the items in chapter 4 of the Curtin and Gaither text on regulatory environments. So you'll be doing 4 things in this essay. First, you'll write some reflective thoughts about regulatory environments discussed in chapter 4 of the Curtin and Gaither text. Then you'll include a discussion about how these concepts, or this concept, relates to global public relations. Then you'll support your assertions with at least 3 outside sources. And then the last thing you'll do is be sure to integrate information from the Golan text on public diplomacy within the essay. So your essay should be formatted within complete APA format with a minimum of 500 words, no more than 1,000 words. And when we say complete APA format, which is required on all assignments, this includes a cover page, abstract, reference page, proper text citations, and information related to that. This assignment is due on Sunday, so you do have some time on that. You'll see that we're going to get into some of the ideas, some sociological ideas here in the course text this week, because they provide us with some great information to help us further understand not just regulatory environments, but also the circuit of culture. So one particular thing that I wanted to overview is to provide you with some idea of what is sociological imagination. It was developed by one of the best-known sociological professors and perspectives by C. Wright Mills in 1959. He really argued that a sociological perspective, which was called and known as sociological imagination, really enabled someone to see the connections between private troubles and public issues. Such a perspective like this suggests that we can understand the condition of the individual only by situating that person in a larger context of society. So, for example, college students typically make very personal and individualized decisions about what college they want to attend, based off of very private troubles and public issues. So if you step back a moment, you can see that the individual has a private choice of attending college and makes sense only in the larger public context of society. We understand this idea as individual choice in the broader context of an economy in which a college education is typically perceived to be required for more and more occupations now, and that we understand that some students' choices in light of a larger cultural idea that highly values formal education as an idea of a societal influence. So typically speaking, Mills told us that we make personal decisions based on societal influence and are situating that person within the larger context of society. If I attend college, I'll be able to get this type of job, I'll be able to live this type of lifestyle, and I can see myself fit into this context of society in this particular way. So to clearly define this, or just to look at this a little more deeply, or maybe not deeply, just a little more upfront, is that a society is a group of people within a common territory of interaction and culture. And it's essentially a social group that consists of 2 or more people who interact and identify with one another in some way. It's usually defined by territory, which is some type of physical location, interaction, which is some way that you interact or communicate with one another, and the culture of that particular area. So to identify, because we're talking about the circuit of culture and global public relations this week, culture is defined as people of the same society sharing aspects of their culture, such as language, or beliefs with one another, and particularly thinking that the culture refers to the ideas of language, values, beliefs, behavior, material objects that constitute a people's way of life. It typically ends up being a defining way of society or element of society, which is really important to keep in mind. Curtin and Gaither define culture as a process by which meaning is produced, circulated, consumed, commodified, and endlessly reproduced and renegotiated within society. It's important to know that culture plays a crucial role in international public relations practice and that it is embraced with the broader definition that underlines a typical tradition of cultural studies. Specifically speaking, we'll see that ideology, which relates to concepts such as worldview, belief systems, and a system of meaning that helps people define and explain the world and make value judgments about that world, plays a huge role within this idea of the information that Curtin and Gaither, as well as the other author or other text, provides within this week's reading. So I wanted to present you with sociological imagination and some definitions of society and culture to help us really keep that in mind. Really, particularly in a contemporary society in which we live in today, it's media that is most often acts as the bridge between people and their private lives and their relation to the public world. When we look at it in the constants of the sociological imagination that Mills brought up to us. When we look at it in understanding the importance of social relations, which deals a lot with public relations, it is understanding the importance of social relations that lies at the heart of thinking sociologically. So when we look at social relations, they are defined in a big picture idea of three particular areas: relationships between institutions, relationships with an institution, and relationships between institutions and individuals. It's important to see this from this perspective that sociologists and sociology as a discipline view relationships in that context, because in public relations, we're dealing not only with building and managing relationships, but making sure that people have a firm understanding of that within their society. So when we look at ideas like the circuit of culture, we see that it's very important to see how it relates to the ideas presented within global public relations, in the sense that we are dealing a lot with and overcoming a lot within our communication, some ideological perhaps, but definitely cultural and sociological imagination ideas within society. So we have to understand what those societal norms are, how that's influenced by sociological imagination, as well as how that's influenced by culture and ideology to appropriately and effectively communicate with our consumers. It's really phenomenal when you think of it from that perspective. Now, I provided a figure here and a graphic of the circuit of culture model. It's really a really interesting idea that tells us that the concepts within these 5 moments within the circuit provide a shared cultural space where meaning is shaped, modified, and recreated synergistically. Meaning there's no beginning or end. You typically move through the 5 moments depending on where you're at within those 5 moments in developing culture, but also meaning within communication. Particularly when we work to shape identity, we look at 5 particular moments. And it's clearly defined by Curtin that there are 5 moments known as regulation, production, representation, and identity, as well as consumption. So when we see that regulation compromises control on a cultural activity. This can range from formal and legal controls, such as informal and local controls of cultural norms and expectations that form a culture within society, and it helps form the context in which public relations activities actually take place. The moment of production really outlines the process by which creators and cultural products imbue them with meaning, a process often known as encoding. So when we look at that, in public relations terms, we can think of this as the process of planning and executing a campaign. So when we get to production, that's really where we're planning and executing a campaign, and there's technological constraints that play a role in the process, but really, or an organizational culture provides the environment in which the production takes place within the context of public relations. When we look at the next moment of representation, it's really representation takes place in the form of an object that takes and meanings is encoded in that form. So the form representation is the form an object takes and the meanings encoded in that form. Remembering that meaning is not inherent to the object itself, but it's socially constructed. And we'll see that we're going to get into some ideas of social constructionism in a second. So keep that in mind. When we look at how it's socially constructed, we can see that producers encode meaning into cultural artifacts often with a specific target audience in mind, and we hope to convey that meaning in all aspects of the communication artifact. Next is consumption, and consumption is when messages are decoded by audiences. Consumers more commonly spoken as a target publics. Consumers typically are more commonly spoken as of target publics in public relations, or identifying a specific audience for a specific campaign, bring their own semantic network of meaning to any communicative exchange. They're the active creators of meaning, putting issues and products to use in their everyday lives. So as we consume media, it's important to know that who are our audiences that we're attracting within that particular communication or public relations campaign. Identity is a huge part of this circuit, meaning that identities are meanings that accrue to all social networks, from nations to organizations and public. It's a common role of public relation practitioners within an organization to establish and maintain an organizational identity. It's very important to keep this in mind as we move through that public relations practitioners function as cultural intermediators, mediators between producers and consumers who actively create meaning by establishing an identification between products, issues, and publics. So as we move through the circuit of culture, I want to back up and talk about this idea of social constructionism, because we'll see that representation often takes form in many different ways. And you'll also notice that last week we talked about different transmissions of communication and such, that we want to get to that ritualistic communication, but you'll see threads and elements of Shannon and Weaver's SEMDR model, the source methods receiver model of linear communication. What they've done with the circuit of culture is taken this to the next level to really build and transcend and transfer us to building ritualistic communication. So as we go through that, it's really important that we highlight some things from social constructionism. I know we've already touched on this a little bit here, but this theory assumes that understanding, significance, and meaning are created not within the individual, but in coordination with other human beings. Human beings are rational, and their experience are by creating a model of a social world and how it works. So it's telling us that all meaning is constructed based off of what our reality is, that our reality is constructed based off of what we've constructed and consumed and observed within our life. So language is the essential system that helps establish reality. What we believe is real is shaped by our social interactions and our life experiences with other people. So if we think about representation in the circuit of culture, we can see that meaning is not inherent to the object itself, but it's socially constructed. And representation is the form an object takes and the meanings encoded in that form. So keep that in mind. Circuit of culture helps us understand how we can disseminate information in a global public relations spectrum to firmly and accurately and appropriately communicate with them to build meaning and get into that ritualistic communication. Take that lens off from a linear approach to get into that ritualistic communication model. When we look at that, it's important to understand and see what regulatory models are in, or environments are in, global public relations. So it's important to know that regulation is a type of control in which various entities compete for power to maintain social, moral, and cultural norms of a society. So think back to sociological and imagination, ideology, and culture. It helps maintain those things. Forms of regulations that exist influence public relations practice every day in society. Politics, technology, economy, culture can all regulate public relations practice. So regulatory environments, such as power distance, is the extent to which less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country accept and expect and accept that power distributed. So it's really important to know that when we look into regulatory environments, it's important to see the political, the technological, economical, and cultural influences society has and how that can regulate public relations practice. Local public relation advisors are needed in international public relations sectors to provide efforts in helping unveil hidden regulators. Essentially what we're saying is that there's certain ways we consume communication, and that this communication can be consumed in multiple ways, but also in a way that is regulatory and somewhat can be offensive if it's not consumed in the proper way or developed and disseminated in an appropriate way for that society. The circuit of culture warns us that regulation is only one moment. Ignoring the other parts and instituting unforeseeable regulations can completely undermine a government program. So this is really a lesson for governmental public relations and national awareness campaigns. Cultural regulation is more difficult to decipher and more deterministic and pilotable, and in creating hidden regulations based on complex cultural codes, which is why we need to tap into that sociological imagination and understanding that people make personal decisions based off the societal influences, and that the sociological imagination enables us to see the connection between private troubles and public issues, and it helps us understand the condition of the individual by situating that person within the larger context of society. This helps us in understanding the influence and the importance of regulatory environments and global public relations. So as we look through the course text, it's important to see that we are reading chapter 3 and 4 of the Curtin and Gaither text, reading chapter 3 and 5 through 5 of the Golan text, as well as completing discussion board number 2 on the circuit of culture and a reflective response on regulatory environments and public relations. It's a good point in the term for you to take a look at your critical assignment that's due in week 8. We will be analyzing a global communication or public relations campaign. It's not due at all yet, but it's a good point for you to start looking at that and thinking about what campaign you're going to choose that is selected from the syllabus and provided within the course. If you have any questions, please reach out. I look forward to interacting with you this week, and I pray you all have a blessed week. God bless.